Hi, folks. I'm Liz Hitchcock, and I direct the Federal Policy Program for Toxic Free Future. And I'm your host today. Welcome to our briefing. We hope this provides an opportunity to connect staff in Washington, D.C. with the work that's being done by our staff and programs in Washington State, which is on the leading edge of protecting people and the planet from toxic chemicals. I'd like to start with some housekeeping. We are recording this session up until the questions so we can make the presentations available, and we'll circulate a link in the follow-up email we'll send to you. If you have any questions, please use the QA function on the bottom of your screen to ask them. We will try to get to as many as time allows after our presentations. If we don't get to your questions, or if the questions occur to you after, our last slide will have the contact info for follow-up. Other than the panelists, everyone should be on mute, but please make sure to mute yourselves now. First, I'd like to do a brief introduction to Toxic Free Future, and if Daniel will show me my first slide. TFF was originally founded in Seattle in 1981 as the Washington Toxics Coalition, a local grassroots group working to reduce dangerous pesticide use in forests, on roadsides, and on farms. 40 years later, we have evolved into a leading national organization that drives strong laws and corporate responsibility that protect the health of all people on the planet. And it's important to recognize that Toxic Free Future's accomplishments in Washington State often serve as models that are adopted in other states and on the federal level. Regulatory action in Washington has also led to companies reducing their use of hazardous chemicals in products used nationwide and globally. Safer Chemicals, Healthy Families built a diverse coalition of hundreds of health, environment, consumer, and labor groups and businesses who work to reform our nation's broken chemical safety system, the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA, in 2016. And then with our coalition partners, we launched the Mind the Store campaign in 2013 to highlight and increase the urgency for reform and to drive retailers to eliminate toxic chemicals and adopt comprehensive corporate chemical policies. In 2020, just 3 years ago, Safer Chemicals, Healthy Families, and the Mind the Store campaigns joined with Toxic Free Future, bringing our focus on federal policy and marketplace transformation together with Toxic Free Future's 40-year history of accomplishment. And today, TFF deploys a unique combination of resources and strategies to transform the chemical economy that my colleagues will tell you about. We target significant sources of dangerous chemicals and pollution for reduction. We ground our work in strong science and conduct original research and investigations to educate government and corporate decision makers and the public. We lead efforts to advance policies at all levels of government and in corporations that are rooted in prevention, requiring transparency of toxic chemical use, assessment of hazards, and use of the safest solutions. And we develop long-term partnerships and coalitions and strategically mobilize the public to press for government and corporate action. It's better to have the folks who are doing the work talk about our work. So allow me to introduce our first panelist. Erica Schrader leads our scientific research program, developing strategic investigations to advance Toxic Free Future's goals. Research topics and expertise include testing breast milk for PFAS and flame retardants, tracing the path of toxic chemicals from the home to waterways, and biomonitoring pregnant women for bisphenol A, phthalates, and other chemicals. She also led our early efforts to secure protections for salmon from pesticides and to advocate for organic and sustainable agriculture. Erica has degrees from the School of Natural Resources and the Environment at the University of Michigan and from MIT. And I am happy to turn it over now to Erica.
Thank you, Liz. So I'm going to thank you for the very kind introduction, and I'm going to be speaking to our scientific research work. And just to introduce you to that work, I'm going to give 3 examples from the world of PFAS, or forever chemicals, because as we know, these are chemicals that are harmful at low levels of exposure that now contaminate our communities, our drinking water, wildlife, and people. The first example I'm going to give is our work looking at PFAS in breast milk. You can do the next slide. So when we started this research several years ago, there had not been testing of PFAS in breast milk from US moms in 15 years. And so we really didn't know to what extent the levels of contamination had changed. We wanted to know, was there a difference based on, as a result of changes in use patterns in manufacturing? And specifically, we wanted to know, were the chemicals, the PFAS that were in current use, starting to build up in the breast milk of US moms? Next slide. Unfortunately, we did find PFAS in 100% of the samples. And we found that, that a number of the chemicals were really widespread in the breast milk from these women. There were 16 total detected, and 12 of those were found in more than half of the samples. And one thing that was really disturbing is that we found that the PFAS that were in current use were, when we looked at the levels of PFAS detections over the last 25 years or so globally, and disturbingly, the chemicals in current use, detections of them had been doubling every 4 years. So this really goes against what the industry had promised us, or had been, had told us, that the PFAS in current use would not bioaccumulate. And, this shows the importance of this kind of research to really help make the case that we need to look at PFAS as a class, because in many cases, we can't predict the behavior of these chemicals. And we need to, make sure that we're addressing them as a class, because the ones that, even though they may not predict that they would bioaccumulate, they may then turn up in our breast milk. Next slide. Another study that we did related to PFAS, we've done several investigations looking at testing products for PFAS. And most recently, we tested textiles, because we wanted to know to what extent were PFAS still being used in outdoor apparel, and to what extent will we find them in indoor furnishings like bedding, tablecloths, and napkins. Next slide. So what we found was that, indeed, most items that were marketed as stain or water resistant did contain PFAS. We found PFAS in 72% of those products. And we were able to use this information to support policy work in California and New York, as those states considered and passed policy to ban PFAS use in textiles. And we were also able to use this information in our work that Sherry will talk about later, convincing retailers to stop selling products that contain PFAS. Okay, now you can go to the next slide. And then finally, I wanted to touch on PFAS and firefighting foam as an example of the importance of, once we convince a product sector to move on from toxic chemicals like PFAS, the importance of making sure that they're moving towards safer alternatives. So in Washington, early on, we found out that we had extensive contamination of PFAS, mostly around our military bases, as a result of its use in firefighting foam. And so Washington State in 2018 was the first state to ban PFAS in firefighting foam. So, this use in particular, it was very clear that it was incredibly important, as the industry moved to alternatives to PFAS, that we make sure that those alternatives were safer, because this is a product that was going to be widely distributed in the environment. Next slide. So to try and move the industry towards safer substitutes, and not just a substitute that we would later regret was used, we partnered with Clean Production Action to create the Green Screen Certified for Firefighting Foam program. And the intent of this was to make sure we had foams that were on the market that purchasers would be able to choose and know that they were choosing something that was safer, and that they wouldn't, again, regret later on that they had chosen. So the way that this certification works is it has various levels. At the lowest level, the bronze certification, it at least makes sure that companies are avoiding known chemicals of high concern. at higher levels of certification, that the companies actually invest in assessing all of the ingredients in their product and make sure that they don't use ones that have known concern. So this is really important information for purchasers, because they can then they are then able to select foams that have been screened for these hazardous chemicals and choose something that's safer. All right, I will then pass it over to Sherry.
If I could just for a moment interrupt Sherry by reminding folks that to use the Q&A button to record questions. And our next panelist, Sherry Peel, will talk about our work to transform the marketplace. Sherry leads the development of our Mind the Store retailer report card. And for more than 20 years, she has worked to create and implement leadership strategies for a transition to safer chemicals. She came to TFF from Clean Production Action, where she worked as program manager of the Chemical Footprint Project and also led the development of the PBDE Chemical Action Plan for Washington State and comprehensive plans to address mercury in Washington and Massachusetts. She has degrees from MIT and Cornell University. And so we welcome Sherry to the call.
Thanks, Liz. So as Liz said, our market work is done through the Mind the Store campaign, which we began in 2013 to create a race to the top among retailers to sell products with safer chemicals. So we do this by both publicly celebrating leaders and holding laggards accountable, and also by working behind the scenes with retailers to share our knowledge about best practices and the impacts of the products that they're selling. Next slide. The main tool of the Mind the Store campaign is the retailer report card. The retailer report card lays out a framework for companies to move from an initial commitment to selling products with safer chemicals all the way through to actually quantifying the safer products on their shelves. This framework is built on experience with our partners and businesses across sectors for over nearly 2 decades to identify best practices. Yeah. So at a high level, these steps are first, we'll look at the green bar there and move from left to right. So first, we ask for retailers to make a commitment at the corporate level to move to safer chemicals. And second, transparency, then to learn what chemicals are in the products that the retailers sell, with this information going both from the suppliers to the retailers and from the suppliers to the consumers. Third, ban the bad. We ask that retailers restrict the sale of hazardous chemicals in the products that they sell. And fourth, safer solutions, that they ensure that the hazardous products that are being replaced are replaced with safer solutions. So the report card grades retailers and how well they're doing implementing all of these steps. Next slide. The first retailer report card was issued in 2016, grading 11 of the country's largest retailers, who received an average grade of D+. Over the next 5 years, we saw that grade improve to an average of a B- as the retailers began to build out their chemicals management systems, in many cases explicitly in response to their retailer report card grades. Next slide. We're now up to grading 50 of the largest retailers in North America. You might see more than 50 logos here. That's because some of them are owned by the same corporate parent. We're now in the process of grading retailers for the 6th edition of our report card, which will be published in November for the holiday shopping season. Next slide. So in addition to the retailer report card, we work with individual retailers to improve their performance. A number of retailers based in Washington have emerged as leaders in this space, going beyond regulation to ensure that the products they sell are safer. Next slide. The foundation for reducing hazardous chemicals in products is a corporate chemicals policy that commits the retailer to using safer chemicals. These policies are traditionally not part of a typical business. So after many conversations and sign-on letters, both Costco and Amazon created and have implemented corporate chemicals policies. Next slide. Then in building out their chemicals policy, Amazon banned methylene chloride and actually also NMP in paint strippers. Methylene chloride and NMP are both hazardous chemicals that are found in some paint strippers. EPA was poised to restrict these, and then political conditions changed. And so at that point, Mind the Store started a campaign with a number of retailers, and the retailers voluntarily pulled these products from their shelves. And this created the political conditions where now EPA has regulated methylene chloride and NMP in paint strippers for consumer-facing products. The work's not done yet because only consumer-facing sales are banned. So suppliers that sell directly to trades can still sell paint strippers with NMP and methylene chloride. And so we'd really like to see EPA finish the job there. Next slide. PFAS, which Eric has already talked about, is used in food packaging. Again, two Washington-based retailers, Amazon and Starbucks, have removed the PFAS from their food packaging. With Starbucks, we worked with one of our partners to test the food packaging that Starbucks uses in all of their stores around the world, and shared those results with Starbucks. Shortly thereafter, Starbucks announced that they would be removing PFAS from their food packaging, and we believe that this quarter they've actually completed doing that. Next slide. Finally, PFAS also used in textiles, raincoats, tents, other textiles, anything that where you need water and oil resistance. Over 150,000 customers of REI, again, we were working with our partners here, wrote to REI asking that REI eliminate PFAS in all of the textiles that they sell. Forward this slide. And just in February, REI announced that it will, in fact, ban all PFAS or ban PFAS in all textiles by 2025.
Thanks, Sherry. I'd like now to have Daniel Parkers talk about the policy work that we're doing in Olympia. Daniel leads state and federal organizing for Toxic Free Future. Before he joined us, he served as Director of Policy and Communications for the Nonprofit Association of Washington, connecting and empowering Washington nonprofits. He also served as the policy manager at Clean Air, North Carolina, focusing on air quality and environmental justice and combating climate change, and on Capitol Hill with the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. He received his master's from Auburn University at Montgomery. And thank you for joining us, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Liz. And I'll really be talking about how Washington State has been leading when it comes to chemical policy and setting precedents on really the national level. To give you a quick overview, this is a short list of the key laws that Washington State Legislature has passed. Those that are bolded here are where our state was the first in the country to set the precedent. And this is a big list, but of particular note are two of these. And it's that first one, the persistent bioaccumulative and toxic PBT policy that really guides much of the work that we've been doing to ban chemicals. And the second is Safer Products for Washington down there in 2018 that really set a precedent that we're currently following through on. And I'll talk a little bit more about. But it's based on a systemic framework for change that is focused on transparency, knowing what's out there, banning the worst that you've heard about, a hazard-based framework, knowing the effects that it has on humans and the environment, and then incentivizing the safest. Together, these set an approach to not use toxic chemicals from the outset and to avoid human and environmental harm of toxic chemicals overall, which leads us to Safer Products for Washington that I had mentioned. Now, this tackles classes of chemicals rather than single ones in the products that we use and that are on our store shelves. It includes a hazard-based assessment of safer alternatives, directs ecology to address priority products with identified chemical classes on specific timelines, and then gives ecology the authority to ban, restrict, or require disclosure of chemicals in products. So it's using that framework of transparency, hazard-based assessment, banning the worst to move forward to safer products within our state and on our store shelves. And it's working right now. So you've got two parallel sets of deadlines going on, the reporting to the legislature and then the rulemaking. This also happens in cycles. So we're currently in the very first cycle. We're waiting on the final rule to be delivered. That'll come in June of this year, at which point the cycle starts again. Right now, we're focused on PFAS, organohalogens, phthalates, bisphenols. If you want to know more about those individually or the products that they're in our homes, oftentimes, let us know in the Q&A and we'll be happy to go into the details with that. But once this cycle is complete, it begins again with a second set of priority chemicals. So it's using that framework in a way that is repeatable and highly effective for Washingtonians overall, but is backed up by efforts to replace the products that we know cause harm with those safer alternatives. So Ecology in Washington has an existing product replacement program. They offer vouchers and replacements in all of the categories that you see here. There also, to back this up, are active chemical assessments and research taking place. These programs really are designed to help inform other states and to publicly share information for both manufacturers, but also for consumers. And that leads to reports like this recent one from the Department of Ecology that focused on cosmetics being used by Washington residents. So it tested products that were on store shelves in Washington and chosen in part because of known disproportionate impacts in these product categories. Here it says cosmetics, but really think cosmetics and personal care products. Everything from makeup to shampoo to deodorant and the whole suite of personal care products that we all use every day. The results of this, frankly, were startling. Formaldehyde in 26 out of 30 products that were tested. These are body lotions, hair products, a number of others. Lead was detected in a number of different products. It really showed the need for Washington to take action in this area. In a quick note, MOCRA, as all of you know, has been a real advancement and really necessary in moving federal policy. However, it does not ban chemicals in cosmetics. It really leaves that open to the individual states, which is why this current legislative session in Washington, the Toxic Free Cosmetics Act, HB 1047, is moving forward. And it covers, again, all cosmetics and personal care products, everything from that makeup to shampoo to deodorant. And returning to that framework that we had talked about at the beginning, it bans the worst, 9 chemical classes, including a new lead limit. It fills the gap in data and provides hazard assessment, including environmental health certifications implemented by the EPA, provides for those safer alternatives, including programs to support cosmetologists in the state, and allows for this information to be publicly available. Transparency. Right now, it's made its way through the House and is very likely to get a vote in the Senate very, very soon. And honestly, this is already leading on a national level. Oregon has a bill that they're running right now in their session that is nearly identical. Vermont has been amending one that they're running to be as identical to the Washington bill as possible. New York has a suite of bills that, if combined, are very similar to what Washington is running right now. So already, this legislation is helping Washington to lead again when it comes to other states. And frankly, it's been making quite a splash in the media as well. Everyone from Seattle Times to KUOW to King 5 have been covering both the report from Ecology and its effects on us as individuals, also on the environment, but also on the bill itself and what it would do to make things different in Washington. And all of this is to say, Washington is leading, but could definitely use some help with those programs that we're running inside the state. For example, the take back program, those vouchers or switching out products that we know cause harm. it can be expensive. Just a quick back of the envelope calculation for you. Firefighting foam or PFAS turnout gear. So turnout gear that firefighters use every single day. Lots of it has PFAS in it that we know causes harm to the firefighters. If we were to replace all of that, and there are safer alternatives that are available on the market for all 10,000 firefighters in our state, back of the envelope, that'd be about $70 million. A cost, but an achievable one, and really needed, especially for those frontline first responders that are putting their lives on the line, as you all know. So all of this is to say Washington is leading, but can definitely use support. And to talk a little bit more about that, I will hand it back to you, Liz.
Thank you, Daniel. I am our last presenter, but I wanted to share the slide that's in front of you to acknowledge that PFAS doesn't just happen in our water, doesn't just happen in the packages that we encounter or the firefighting foam we encounter, but PFAS contamination happens at the beginning in production, in manufacture, in use, and then in disposal. And it is contaminating and causing health harms to our workers, our wildlife, our loved ones, our air and water. So there is a lot of work to do, and we are hopeful that we can be in partnership with you on that. Next slide. I'm Liz Hitchcock, and I hope that I've met some of you in real life, or that I'll have that opportunity soon. As Federal Policy Director, I lead our advocacy work with Congress, EPA, and the federal agencies. And before we integrated with Toxic Free Future, I led Safer Chemicals, Healthy Families advocacy work to reform TSCA, the lead federal toxic statute, after 28 years of working with the PIRGs here in DC. I'd like to close out our presentations by highlighting some of our work on PFAS pollution in the 118th Congress and check in about the help that we need from your offices. Next slide. As you no doubt know, a few weeks ago, the US EPA announced drinking water standards for 6 individual PFAS chemicals. This was the first time that drinking water standards have been proposed for a new chemical under the Safe Drinking Water Act since it was updated in 1996. And we applauded these important steps forward by the Biden administration. They'll help communities across the country that are suffering the health and financial consequences of ongoing exposure to these highly toxic forever chemicals. But that's not the end of the story, as my colleagues have said. Next slide. We will have to keep cleaning up and paying the cost with millions of taxpayer dollars and tremendous harms to our health unless we prevent further pollution. Next slide. To prevent further PFAS contamination and shut down its path of pollution, we have got to stop using PFAS chemicals in big ticket items like the firefighting foams used by military and civilian firefighters, and in consumer products like food packaging and textiles. Next slide, please. Congress has made progress in previous years' military spending bills, or the National Defense Authorization Act, and in the 2018 FAA reauthorization bill. And they have to keep moving forward to protect us from these toxic chemicals. In the 2020 NDAA, Congress put the military on a schedule to phase out foams with PFAS, which should allow the FAA to make good on the promise of the 2018 FAA reauthorization, where Congress told the FAA that they could allow airports to use PFAS-free firefighting foam as has been used effectively in countries around the world for years. Next slide, please. We were very pleased that the Department of Defense published a new military specification for PFAS-free firefighting foam early in January, beating the January 31 deadline that Congress set in the 2020 NDAA. Next slide, please. We are concerned, though, that as DoD and FAA move to PFAS-free foams, about what chemicals are used instead. to keep winning the win, and it was a very substantial win that Congress made in 2018 and 2019, we should be looking to certifications for foams that do the job they're supposed to do without polluting our communities and contaminating our bodies. Next slide. Green Screen Certified, which Sherry and Erica have both had a role in developing, and which Erica told you a lot more about, has 36 foams that have been certified as meeting military standards. I could only fit this number on my screen on this slide. So next slide. So we hope that the military and FAA will use the Green Screen Certified as a measure of the efficacy and safety of the foams that they use. Another major source of PFAS pollution that Washington has led states and the marketplace on is ending the use of PFAS in food packaging. As of 2022, 11 states have enacted legislation, and more than 22 of the biggest food chains, from McDonald's and Burger King to Whole Foods and Starbucks, representing 140,000 locations in more than 100 countries worldwide, have done the same and have made commitments to stop their use of PFAS chemicals in their food packaging. Next slide, please. Last summer, Senator Murray and the HELP Committee passed an amendment to the FDA user fee bill that would have done so on the national level, but the amendment did not make it into the omnibus spending bill at the end of the year. And we've heard from the bill sponsors that they plan to reintroduce it this year, and we'll look to you for your support. As you can see by the slide in front of you, there are abundant, safer alternatives, and the list is growing every day. So this will be a good opportunity to get another big ticket item off the list. I would be remiss in appropriation season if I didn't go back to what Daniel was saying about and ask for your advice on how we can get support for prevention strategies in the states to support states like Washington that are working to scale up prevention programs and hazard assessments. To again cite the example that Daniel gave you, we know that protecting firefighters by replacing their turnout gear to PFAS-free gear alone is going to take about $70 million for 10,000 firefighters in Washington state. It's going to take even more money to change out the foam in fire trucks at airports across the country. Programs that support hazard assessments and safer solutions deserve support from the appropriators. We're spending too much to fix the problem after the fact. We need your help to invest in the solutions at the front end. I want to close there and ask if my colleagues would like to add anything. And if not, we'll stop recording and turn to any questions.